I'm going to give you a businessman perspective. You heard from my background that I have been in a lot of places. I've been mostly recently CFO of very large companies. And that is relevant because as CFO, I get to have a decision on allocation of capital. Where do we build our factories? Do we build a factory in China? Do we put it in Bangladesh or Vietnam? Do we source our products? What is the freight cost? So those are decisions that even though I may be sitting here in the US pertain to investment in China, and therefore I am frequently and constantly looking at a lot of research. Where are costs going long term? What are labor costs? What is the expected inflation? But we also look at where do we invest money for growth as CFOs? Where do you put your stores? What kind of products? I'm also on the board. You heard of a company that sells brands, Calvin Klein, Tommy Hilfiger, that has a very large consumer business in China, and China is the largest sourcing partner for them. So I'll give you that perspective. I will also inform my comments from my experience in Latin America and Europe. And the reason why I think that is relevant is because those countries, when you looked at the 1980s, Eastern Europe, some countries in Latin America, some were saying were a more promising investment story than China. And China blew way past them, faster than anyone could have imagined. So I'll give you also a perspective informed by what I think China did right and what those countries did not do right. So first I want to give you kind of a macro view, and then I'm going to go into the specifics of what I think, my view, is going to happen in the consumer markets in China. First I want to talk to you about consumers in general, and this may come to you as a shocker. But some of the companies I work for spend hundreds of millions of dollars every single year, not from time to every single year, just studying consumer habits. Whether it's Pepsi, Walmart, even or Rubbermaid, etc. And here's what we found, and I know others like P&G have found, that I'm going to say it in a different way, and then I'm going to restate it. Chinese consumers, right? If you're Chinese, the ethnic Chinese, you're no different than anyone else. You're the same as everyone else. As a consumer, here's what consumer goods companies found, is that consumer habits are more easily predictable by income levels, how much money you make, your family income level, than by ethnicity, religion, nationality, any other measure. One of the eye-opening studies that one of my former companies did, PepsiCo, they took a group of teenagers from all over the world. They asked them to change their clothes, and they put the clothes in rooms. And they asked people to go identify what country they came from. 90% of the answers were wrong because you could not tell. Teenagers are global. They have access to information, and therefore they consume, and that trend will continue. The older you are, the more likely you are to be the exception to that rule about income levels. The younger you are, the more similar your habits, consumption habits, will be based on income levels. So that, for us in the consumer goods industry, was very eye-opening, and actually has led and is still leading to significant changes in how companies market their products, how they talk to consumers. So if you're still thinking the internal dialogue is telling you, no, I don't agree with that, I think we are different, the Chinese. I will tell you how I think, my view, right? I could be wrong. How I think the Chinese are different. I think the Chinese experience has been different in only two ways. One, magnitude. Everything is big in China. 1.3 billion people. Soon to be the largest middle class in the world. And I think most people know this, but I would like to state it. Soon China will have a middle class that will be larger than the entire population of this country. That means that if you are in consumer goods, you better be in China. If you're not in China, you're in trouble. So you're different, and the magnitude is big. Now, India has a lot of people as well. So how come they're not China? So maybe large numbers is not the only difference. And I would say that the only difference then that has allowed China to take off is the speed of change. And I will try to stay away from politics, but it is impossible not to recognize that the only reason China has been able to execute with that speed so far has been because of the type of government that they have. The government in China has been able to do what not democracy in Latin America was able to do during the same period of time. And that, in my view, is the main reason, not the only reason, the main reason for the huge difference, the gap that we saw China take off and leave the rest of the countries in their dust. There are also some cultural aspects that are more nuanced to the Chinese experience that we see in business. For example, the fact that the Chinese culturally seem to be more open to new ideas and to other cultures than even Eastern Europe was to Western Europe at the time. We were surprised to see that. Certainly that Latin America and that a lot of Asia, Japan, for example, is relatively insular. And that has not been in China, has allowed China to learn faster and grow faster. So I'll talk more about speed and the government just briefly later, but I would like to say that with the 5-year plan, what the Chinese government has been trying to do is the same thing that my colleagues, CFOs, do, is allocation of capital. And the bigger the pie, the more difficult that becomes. It gets to a point where that is impossible to do in a centralized way. The large companies in the Fortune 500, that's why they created business units, to have decisions made closer to the consumer. To the extent that the Chinese government behaves like a business, I believe they will need to do the same thing too, and that will drive change. Now, the other comment I want to make about, if you're asking yourself about the questions, well, we're different. What about pollution? What about corruption? Why is this different in China? I will tell you that it's not different either. Go back, read your history, and look at the time when this country was about the same stage of development, or Europe, which was worse, same stage of development that China has been going through, and you will see worse pollution and worse corruption. The Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which everybody in finance and legal is so concerned with, was not created because of corruption in the third world. It was created because of corruption from the US. So that's not to excuse it, but that is to say is an evolution, and that too will pass. But I will also tell you that there's no history, there's no instance, I would challenge the academics to come up with one, where you have rapid creation of wealth in the world without corruption. They just go hand in hand for a time, and then the corruption becomes a weight on the growth. The government stamps it out because they want to get rid of the weight, or there's public outcry, one of the two, but usually it's driven by economic factors, and it goes not completely away, but it's reduced to acceptable levels. And so if what I said is true about consumers being similar and China being similar to any other country except for magnitude and speed, what does that mean for the growth? What can you expect in the future? Again, point of view informed by my experience, but could be wrong, okay? And how can you benefit by definition? So what you can expect, as Dr. Prime was saying, is that the economy will be driven more by consumer demand and less by investment in the future. But you will see consumers becoming more demanding. They will demand more value. And what that means is they will want higher quality and lower prices. And that always, in every country, in every place, leads to sector consolidation. So if you're in the banking sector, right, your M&A teams are going to be very busy. In China, there are over 300 car companies, I believe. not believe when I read that. And on almost every category in business that you look at, there are 3 to 4 players, ultimately at the end. 2 get the lion's share of the profit. A third is a niche player that makes decent profit, but not a lot. And the fourth struggles, but stays around. Every category you look at, Pepsi and Coke, or I should say Coke and Pepsi since I'm in red territory. Dr. Pepper is a niche player. They have root beer. Others don't have. They have Snapple tea. Others don't have. My former company, Cott, private label soft drinks, is the fourth player that struggles. Very tiny, thin margins. But you look at every category and you will find that that holds to be true. That will be true in China. Over how long period of time, I don't know, but I know it will happen. And because speed has been a hallmark of China's story, you can expect it to happen relatively fast. There will be growth, as the proprietor was saying, in the services sector. Of course, in health services, that is driving by an aging population, the same as the US. So the health sector will grow faster. There will be growth as it happens every place. As income levels increase and disposable income increases, there will be growth in the affordable luxury sector. And that's the company where I'm on the board, PVH Corp, is betting on. That brands like Calvin Klein, Tommy Hilfiger, some of their other brands will grow faster in the future than the luxury brands are growing today. Because the first stage of development, when countries are becoming rich, is people want to show off. And they buy the Louis Vuitton, they buy Pierre Cardin, they buy the really, really expensive stuff, but that's always a small niche, because there's only so many people that can afford that. In China, that's less than 1% of the population. The big bang for the consumer goods will be when the middle class start to spend in a big way, and then they go for the affordable luxury, not for the expensive luxury. So the big growth for some of the companies, Dr. Prime, is still to come.
That's good news.
At least that's what we're betting on. You will see more growth in the travel industry. In fact, you are seeing it already. It starts always with the niche, with the small segment, with very expensive travel. But that will expand. Last year, I saw some statistics. I think it was only 2.2 million Chinese tourists that visited the U.S. One day soon, you will not be able to go to any large city in the U.S. without seeing a lot of Chinese tourists. Because if only 2 to 5% of the population decides to visit us, that's a ton of people. So you will see a lot of growth in that. That's a good sector to be in. Education in general. The country is already very competitive. It's becoming more competitive. Some people think about large population, but every company I've been associated with, we had trouble sourcing talent in China. We had trouble sourcing talent in China. The kind of talent that you're looking for and the multinational companies are looking for is somewhat similar profile, and there's a limited number of that. So you'll see education growth in general. Food and the food service industry will grow. So when your basic needs are met, you start looking for more sophisticated foods, other things, and that will come. So that's what we, that's how some of us in business see the economy and the business environment developing. I think that that will force the government to make adjustments, because I said the government in China is doing the same thing that a CFO does in a large company, trying to allocate capital to improve, not necessarily returns in the case of a government, but the social well-being, generate jobs, facilitate migration from the countryside, etc. Whatever the objective is, I assure you that it gets too big. It gets so big that you cannot allocate capital